Welcome to our next guest. Welcome back. And as this series is just getting started, let me take a moment to explain to you what we are all about. Our next guest is where we bring you the real stories of the people behind the titles, from business to academia and everything in between, where we uncover the moments, the mindsets, and the missteps that earned them their stripes. And in this episode, either Sandrine or me invite people from our personal networks, someone that we admire, or someone with a story worth telling and worth listening to. And today's guest, Brad, was invited by Sandrine. They know each other really well. I will be doing a lot of listening, learning, but I'll ask a few questions along the way. But I hand over to Sandrine. Sandrine, please do the introduction.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm really pleased. Thanks a lot, Donna, for the intro. I'm really pleased to have you on board, Brad. So just to give a quick introduction, a glimpse of who is Brad Argent. Brad is TV producer and amazing storyteller, but this is not all what we will be discussing today. He doesn't just tell stories, he embodies them, he inhabits them. His voice, pacing, the tone, his emotional presence have the power to transport listeners. And especially in a world of overflowing with content and with noise, Brad brings something incredibly rare, to my point of view, the ability to make people stop, feel, reflect, and remember. His work in family story, identity, and legacy in the world of Ancestry has shown him and us that the most powerful stories are often the most human. So in this episode, we will explore what truly makes a story resonate and how each of us, whether on stage or in a quiet moment, can shape and share our own. Thanks a lot, Brad, for being here.
Well, thank you very much. What a wonderful introduction.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I do like telling a story. It's something I've always really enjoyed, Sandrine, and it came from my dad, weirdly. My father was very much got me interested in the idea of folk tales, folk stories, but about Australia, because you can't talk, I can't tell that's where I was born. And I love the idea of moments in history being filtered through multiple lenses over time to either enhance the original meaning of it or completely change it and adapt it. And that was when I was quite young. And then, of course, I stumbled across the works of Joseph Campbell, which really helped me understand the role of narrative in human history. I try not to get too intellectual. I know, I think it has a place in that it's a great framework, but, just like, the frame of a house is absolutely necessary, but to make it yours, you have to decorate it.
Mm.
And
I
so
love the metaphor.
I look at stories my own way. I mean, you said it in the introduction, about it, making it relatable, and I do that. In order for me to do what I do, I have to fall into a story. I have to get pulled into the moment, and I think that's one of the things that attracted me to family history, because family history is ultimately, history. I mean, history is nothing more than the shadows cast by our ancestors as they went about living their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
people make history, and all
Absolutely.
those people have a story, and I love to find out about them. And of course, initially, it's very much about my own family, but now it's like every time I come across a person in history, I'm very, very, very aware of the fact that that's a human being that lived a full life, and I want to know them. And I want to find out how much of them can I reclaim. And look, I know it's a little early in the conversation to get a little too philosophical, but I think part of that's because, as I age, I want to get a sense of, well, what marks am I making on the world? What will I leave behind? I can see a record of my 5 times great grandfather getting baptized in 1810. What's going to be left behind for me in 215 years?
Very interesting.
Oh no,
Very interesting.
but I think
But
that's
when
what
you
kind of drives me.
but when you hear, because this storytelling, when you hear someone tell a story, what really sticks with you? Like, what makes it memorable? What do you hear? Because we hear so many stories around us daily, but what makes it memorable?
Yeah, I think for me, what makes it memorable is character. Who are the people, and what's motivating those people in the story. I think plot is kind of secondary to me. Knowing who the person is, who are the actors in this story, and how are they responding to the things that are happening to them. Well, I think part of that is an artifact of just the nature of the work that I do. It is very centered on individuals rather than on a plot. And indeed, when I'm looking for a story, I'm looking for a character as much as I am looking for an event.
Right.
I'm getting curious, Brad, because obviously, yes, character makes a great story. But what makes, to me, it's like, yes, character is important. But I'm getting curious. What should we hear behind character? Is that vulnerability? Is that personality? Is that the presence? Like,
Yeah. And it's really difficult with history because you're not often given a lot of information. So you have to start being a little bit creative and putting life into someone who you've never met. And it's just like the creative process, right? If you're writing and you're writing a character that doesn't exist, you have to build them. So you build them from your experience. When you're taking somebody from history and trying to reimagine them, you have to understand what the social context is, what's happening around them. There's little bits of insight that history might give you as to who that person was, such as perhaps their occupation or where they lived, but much of it is fantasy.
Mm.
And I don't want that to sound like a bad word. You're filling in the blanks that are left by a lack of recorded history. And as long as you're aware of that and you'll make your audience aware that this is speculative in nature, I think it's absolutely fine. The challenge, of course, is particularly if you're picking a historical character, you're projecting. You cannot take yourself back to that point in history. I am an old white man in the 21st century, so everything I do is going to be through that lens, and I have to be aware of that. And it's really difficult to constantly remind yourself of your own biases and your own prejudices, and you have to be eternally vigilant. And I think that applies whether you're sitting down creating your own stories or whether you're trying to get something approved in a boardroom. You have to think about what are my blind sides? What am I not seeing here? And that's a often courageous thing to do. And scary sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're spot on with that. The thing about the storytelling in the boardrooms is, or at least that's always how I've used it, whenever you have a story to tell or a strategy to defend, you have, of course, a big team around you that gives you input to shape that stories. Because I also feel that, stories are being shaped and you need these humans with their expertise, knowledge around you that give you input to tell that story, especially in the boardrooms, other than maybe storytelling in other environments. But I think, I find so interesting that the way we are telling stories now, especially in business, I see it changing so much. I wonder, do you see all the changes that are going on? AI, platforms, TikTok, social media, the content and stories are becoming so wild. Some are truth. What was it again that we had some years ago? What was it called? Not the truth, but alternative truths.
Oh, yeah.
Alternative truth stories.
It's is it new? No, the actors are all different, but the stories are very much the same. Whilst I think AI is, a significant development, probably on par with the development of the internet. I'm not a doom and gloomer. I see AI as a wonderful tool that will significantly change the way in which we work. In the same way that a power tool makes it easier to drill a hole than a hand cranked drill, right? Does that mean it'll have an impact on how people are employed? Yes, it will. In the same way that renewable energy will have an impact on the fossil fuel industry. Of course, it's going to have an impact. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it also means we should be aware of that and plan around that as much as we can in a capitalist society. Do those things. But I feel what's missing in the corporate world is the art of storytelling. And the other thing that I think, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand, is you never get, at least I have never experienced internally within an organization, any guidance on how to deliver something, how to perform. And I think that there is a gap there. And I have watched senior executives in multiple organizations over the years privately get that assistance and training. In some cases, they've been trained by acting teachers.
Yeah.
And it has significantly changed the way in which they engage with people and has significantly changed their careers, because all they did was just unlock this ability to connect. And it's a connection through story, because all acting really is just telling a story. I still think there's a massive amount of transformation possible. And I think the whole technology stuff is really just a variation on a theme.
I love the way, Brad, that you're saying a great story. It's a one about characters, second about making connection like with people, and actually to individualize your story to your audience. However, we feel and talking about like technology and social media, many people like struggle to share their stories. Now we are living through filters, like on Instagram, there are filters. On YouTube, we are showing just like one aspect, one facet of who we are. And usually it's not like the genuine one or the authentic one. And so how would you encourage like people to share their story, to connect on a really genuine level, even if it's messy, even if it's like unresolved and unstructured? Like, what would you say to someone who feels like sharing the story, but they don't dare to do it?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question. And I think as an older person, it's easier because you care less, right? It's less of an issue if you say what you think and people don't like it. I don't care. I mean, I think it's very difficult in the world that we currently live in to be spontaneous and authentic at the same time, because it's so easy to misspeak. And I think that's harder for people my age because the culture has changed so much, and it's necessary for me to put on a filter and just go, okay, don't refer to something this way, refer to it this way, because it's far more appropriate. So but I think perhaps for younger people, it's not so hard because it's their culture.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm telling a story, I don't use a script, but I have a process, and I always start at the end. So it's all right. Where do I want to be at the end of this story? What's the message I want to get across? What's the point I want to make? What's the reaction that I want? I start there, and then I work backwards about, okay, what are the steps I need to take to get there? Ideally, always 3 acts and 2 turning points. So you're pulling people in, you're changing, you've got a moment of change, a bit more of a story, a moment of change, and then you arrive. So I will rough that out, and then I will write it out a little bit more succinctly, and then I'll never refer to it again. Because that's just the process that I've developed over the years, and it helps me get the idea of the narrative in my mind, and it makes it very clear to me what the outcome is. And that's fine if you're doing a piece to camera and you want to tell a story. But if you're suddenly talking to someone and they're going to interact, what you don't want to be is you don't want to be too rigidly locked into a narrative.
Yeah.
You want to be able to be dynamic and change and take the conversation or the story in the direction that they're reacting to. So you can't be, which is why I don't have a script. And so you need to be able to go down whatever path it is they want to take you. So I kind of feel like there's 2 answers to that question, Sandrine. One would be understand what it is you want to say, understand the audience, understand where you want them to be at the end of whatever it is you're saying, and then just work backwards from that. How do I get there? How do I get there succinctly? How do I get there in an engaging way? But how do I make it authentic? Look, I'm an old white man, right? I whinge and complain about filters and all that sort of crap. But that's fine. Part of me always wonder why I get so angry about those things. But I think all that stuff's fine. That's just part of the technology. That's part of the fun of doing it. If that makes you feel comfortable, it's like putting on makeup. I actually have makeup on at the moment. I have shine killer on because my bald head has a tendency to flare with the light.
Sweet.
So, but whatever makes you feel comfortable. Right? Be you. That's the most important thing. Be your authentic self, and tell the story that way. Don't overproduce things. There's an authenticity that comes from pausing, making mistakes, but being okay with that. So
I like that.
But then if you're talking to someone, don't be too prescriptive about what it is you've got to say. This is really, I mean, it's a really interesting thing, particularly in the corporate world, because if you're in the corporate world and if you're a spokesperson, and as you know, Sandrine, I've been a spokesperson for a long time, you'll have, these are your key messages you've got to get across. These are the things you've got to do. And then they talk you about this thing called bridging. And that's important because you have a job to do and you have a message to get across. But I've always found it far more engaging and always ended up getting more airtime by not sticking to that 100% and by answering the questions that are asked. Going wherever it is the person in control wants you to go and finding a way to get your messages into that conversation rather than sticking too much to what the script is that you've been given. And it's going to be interesting to see how the corporate world evolves in the next few years, because what I see is, I work predominantly in television globally, and more content that's being created is going to be part funded by brands.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how brands react to that and how that world reacts to having brands in there. Now, as Sandrine will tell you, we've worked really at the coalface of that for many years, and it's taken a long time to build those trust relationships between storytellers and brands to accept that they can work together.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of trust issues on the creative side, but the issue on the brand side has been more about getting the brand to accept that they need to let go.
Yeah.
Brands can tell story. Brand is story, right?
Mhm.
That's what a brand is a story. So let the story tell itself. If you do it well, then you'll get the outcome that you want. Now that, again, a caveat around that though, because if awareness is your goal, if you want awareness, then you have to have a different kind of storytelling. But if you don't have an awareness problem, but you have a demand problem, then you need to tell stories that are going to create demand for whatever it is you're providing.
Mhm.
My view on that is don't think about, I've got to create product demand. Think I've got to create category demand. I've got a lot of awareness in that category. People know my brand in that category. If I drive category demand, the really good marketers that I employ will capture that demand. I don't have to worry about the story selling anything other than the desire to participate in a category.
Mm.
Now that's very risky because you're throwing a lot of money at something. There's potentially no product, no brand in it.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you can't have brand around it and outside it and within the ecology of the universe of the story, but within the story is sacred.
Mhm.
So getting brands comfortable with storytelling is challenging, but you can see the big brands, they're doing it. The innovative brands are starting to do it. And
Mhm.
because it's just such an easy way into people.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that because, of course, I come from this fashion industry and storytelling is like the number one thing that happens in this industry. But what I've seen and experienced is that so many companies, they lose their identity because they're trying to fit into a box that's not made for them. They're trying to reach new generations by pretending to be the cool kid, the cool kid on the block, telling stories that don't fit to the brand that they've built. So the one thing that I see in so many reports coming by is authenticity. Authenticity. Stay authentic. Don't try to fit into, I don't know, a cultural thing that is hip and happening now if that's not part of your identity already. Don't try to move away from, your authentic self. And that's basically what you're saying, right? Is stay true to your identity, what you've built as a brand, your authentic self. Don't try to move away from that and keep telling the stories that have gotten you to where you are today.
Yeah, and look, you're absolutely right, Donna. And the challenge with that though is it's harder. It makes it difficult to access new markets.
Yeah.
But I think there is a way into that, but it needs to be considered. It needs to be highly nuanced. You need help because you're not generally, as a brand, you're probably not familiar with engaging with that audience.
Yeah.
And it's risky, and you will fail until you succeed.
And that's that's so true, like what you're saying, like we need to remain really genuine so that we can stand out, because nowadays like all the brands look alike, and the brands that really stand out, like they stick to their values. But going back to you and your story and your personal story, because you are also like a personal brand, per se. You're a TV producer. No, but that's true. You're moderator and you're a spokesperson. And as a spokesperson, is there like anything you had to unlearn or do differently to be a great storyteller? Is there any learnings that you got along the way with experience?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I would think I try to be a better listener, and it's about part of my academic background is in counseling. I'm a therapist by training, and what you learn a lot is to listen. The challenge when you're a spokesperson or when you're on camera or anything is, and you've got something to say, there's this compulsion to say it.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to learn not to do that. And I've become quite comfortable with silence. And the one thing that one of the key takeaways I learned about becoming a therapist was about giving people space. And humans generally, when we interact, we don't like silence. So if I ask you a question, you'll answer very quickly. And then if I don't respond, you'll tell me more.
I'm going to ask another question. I'm going to stack you.
Well, and this is what I find happens when if I'm if I'm telling a story and I want a reaction from somebody, I'll get an initial reaction, and that might be fine, and I can move on. But if I don't really get the initial reaction, I just wait, and you just get. If you're comfortable, be comfortable with the silence, and it takes a long time, and sometimes it is awkward. But people will often fill that, and they will fill that with with beautiful moments of, because it takes a while, I think, for people to get comfortable in those kinds of situations. They'll often give you like a kind of, that's really interesting, or that's great, or, they'll give you a very quick answer. But if you wait, they will give you more information that will drive the story on a little bit further. And that, the nature of the work that I do is often quite emotionally charged. And you want that emotion because it's important for the story. And it's important for the authenticity of the story because it's an emotional story often. So TV is a little different, right? Because particularly if you're pre-recording something, live TV is a completely different beast. But half of your brain has to be in the edit, and the other half of you has to be in the room. And you've got to think, when I'm going to edit this together, do I have the reactions I need for the edit? And given what I know about this story and where I'm going to take it next, is the person ready for that piece of information, or do I need to do other work to get them there? It's quite a complex process to go through. And so I've learned a lot, Sandrine. I've been really lucky in that I've had all these opportunities to learn, and I've worked with brilliant people who've been very, very generous with their time and their knowledge. A day that I don't learn is a day wasted.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody the other day about it, and they said, "Oh, you should do this. You know how to do that." And I said, "I'd rather do something I don't know how to do than do something that I know how to do." Look, it's a wonderful feeling to be able to, master something and feel competent and comfortable in that. But for me, the adrenaline rush of being in a situation where I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, that's what life is, right? But for me, anyway,
Yeah.
I want those moments. I love awkward. Awkward is good because awkward means it's different. It's not usual. It's not normal. It's different. And there's a learning opportunity when something is awkward. And so when my more mischievous mood sort of overtakes, I do have a tendency to create awkward moments.
I like what you're saying, because yes, awkward is good, and that reminds me that like creativity comes from friction. And what you're saying is that, okay, I can share my wisdom through mastery, but I prefer also like to be creative, like through friction or through moment of breakthrough that I'm maybe getting like in discovery mode. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've been really lucky to witness some really interesting moments in life, particularly in the corporate world. And all of them have come from moments, not of, I don't know if friction is the right word, moments of awkwardness. Because there have been moments of discovery, moments of perspective, and they've changed the way people see things. And those voices are often not the ones that you would expect. This is why diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, because these things, these different views, these different mindsets, these different experiences of life can be the jumping off points for massive positive changes within organizations.
You said, like, Brad, and thanks a lot for sharing. I can totally relate to that, that as a therapist, like, you're holding space for the people also to have their breakthrough moment. You said to pause, to be comfortable with the discomfort of remaining silent, and I can totally relate to that while coaching. However, like, how, and especially on TV, you're telling story, how do you stay present, especially when there is a high level of emotion, when the stakes are high, and how do you make sure that you remain grounded in those moments? How do you do that? Because I understand holding space, letting, like, people process what they had to process, but you, on your hand, how do you remain grounded?
Well, I think the honest answer, Sandrine, is I don't always. Particularly if these are really emotional moments, for telling somebody, for example, that their father is not their biological father. Even if you're doing that and it's a pre-recorded moment, you only get one chance to tell that to that person for the first time. Sure, you can do a bunch of pickups if you need to do the pickups, but you only have one chance to lay down a core memory for someone that they're going to take with them for the rest of their lives. That's a hugely important thing and an incredible privilege to be part of that, to get to be part of that person's memory as long as they live. And it's such a privilege because you only really often ever get to do that with people that are very, very close to you. And so I'm always very well aware of the responsibility of that. I often get quite emotional myself when I go through that, which I think is normal and I think that is healthy. And I forget about everything else. The only things in the room are me and that person. Now that's kind of true, but you also have to be aware of, well, where are the cameras, what's in shot, what's happening next. But I have this thing I call the empathy tunnel.
What is
And
that?
part of the job is you're telling somebody something for the first time. And it's going to work a lot better if there's trust between the two of you. And in order for trust to exist, there needs to be a level of empathy. And that has to go both ways. And so you need to create a relationship like that quite quickly. And so you have to go through this process of connecting with somebody in a very meaningful way in quite a short period of time. It's weirdly not unlike dating. You want to feel a connection, you want to find a connection with someone because you want to find the things that are important to both of you. And so my process is to do that and make that happen as soon as I can, as quickly as I can. And look, that's often aided by the fact that the people know they're there for a reason. There's a lot of work gone into producing a particular moment. There's a sense of occasion about what we're doing, so it kind of makes it look. But making those kinds of connections with people helps to make those moments meaningful and important. It's if you forget that for a minute that you're not making television, that the job isn't really about entertaining or engaging an audience. It's about delivering something to somebody, usually very deeply personal information. And, for me, and I take that responsibility very personally, it works. Look, there's a cost to that. There's a personal cost to that. Absolutely. I can get quite emotional and I can often get depressed afterwards. But, I'm aware of that and I do things to counter that and to balance that out. I just remind myself about what a privilege it is to connect to people in that way. And it's probably that, there's a lot of great things about the job that I do. There's a lot of it that sucks, but there's a lot of really good things. But the one thing I love that I really prize above all of it is those moments. And
Deeply impactful.
yeah, and I'm very, very lucky to have a job that allows me to do that.
Yeah, I can sense that, like, those moments of where the stakes are high in terms of emotion, those moments of vulnerability, you do not shy away from it. Like, you you embrace it. Sort of, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it comes back down to being authentic. If something makes you upset, be upset.
Mm.
If something's funny, laugh. Just be human and remind yourself that it's okay to be human.
Yeah. And as you're saying, I love the analogy like with dating, because this is also what I tell my students as a business lecturer. I tend to say a lot, and they will recognize it when they will listen to you, is that marketing is also like it's a dating situation. I mean, you have like this moment of awareness, you get the chance to know the person, then you have this moment of interest, you engage with the person, then you want to get to know more, you test and try, and then you come through a journey. And like you're saying also, like for a story, it's about connecting, and connecting, it's in a dating relationship, you need to connect, you need to relate, you need to feel with the person. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're all looking for something a little bit different. Everybody has their preferences when it comes to dating, and it's the same with the story.
Mm.
Everybody has a preference for a story. I love post-apocalyptic science fiction stories.
You and
Tell us
me.
more.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend hours talking about the psychology of that. But so you've got to understand your audience, right? Understand what are they going to be driven by? What are they going to be motivated by? What makes this story relevant to them? And I've done a lot of radio over the years. And in fact, I love radio. I think I love radio more than television. And I was given 2 pieces of advice very early on. And that was, the audience is one person. Think of the audience as one person. And I kind of feel like that's so relevant for content now, because people are consuming content as a singular. Gone are the days where we sit down as a family and watch something. Most of the content we consume is just me and a screen. So it was like, it's just one person. So don't think about talking to an audience as if you were doing something live. You're just talking to a person. They're just not in the room and they're silent, but there's a person there. And the other piece of advice, which I also think is great for content creators today, is make it relevant to that person.
Mhm.
So if you're telling a personal story, that can be really interesting, but make it meaningful to me. So if you're telling a story about, and it can sometimes just come down to like to language. I'm using this product and it's giving me this experience. You can use this product, and here's a way you can use this product. And here's how this product could, maybe change the way in which you do this thing or do that thing. Make it relevant, make the story relevant to the audience, and the audience is one person. And again, great advice that I got from people who were, experts in their field. And it's not the kind of advice you're probably going to get from a textbook. You're just going to get it from getting out there and doing it. And it's just a great thing about the creator community broadly, is they're all really generous with their ideas. They're all really generous with their experience. They're all open to sharing things and helping others. And it's one of those industries where I've found that there's a lot of focus on lifting people up. Now, there are pockets where that's probably not true, but I feel that the areas that I work in, it's about how can we take people and lift them up. How can we take younger people and give them more opportunities? How can we make this about them rather than about the people at the front? It's a great industry to work in. I love it. I do feel like I maybe came in 20 years too late, but it is what it is.
Storytelling is an art, huh? I mean, it's truly an art, how to tell a story.
Yeah,
I think it's,
it is, but I think you guys, you kind of nailed it. It's authenticity, but it's a kind of sculpted authenticity. It needs structure. It needs a destination. It needs waypoints. And there's an art to the execution of the process, but it is a process. And it's a process that's open to anyone.
yeah. So if you would have to give like a crash course to a room full of powerful business leaders, what would be like one of the first principles that you would teach them to become outstanding in storytelling?
Well, start at the end and work backwards. Understand your audience and give something of yourself. So make the story, whatever the story is, relevant to who you are. And
Nice.
don't be afraid to be, again, we come back to dating. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Right? Let people in. If you don't let them in, all you'll end up with is a series of first dates.
Nice.
I love that. I love that, Brad. And I love like the fact that you're saying, yes, it comes, it goes down like to creating like this connection, obviously being authentic. And it feels like when we listen to that, it feels so natural. And I can imagine that like most of the people who do not feel like storyteller, they're like, okay, so I just have to be me, and then I tell the story, and then I'm a great storyteller. And then so it's huge. It's gonna be like I can go on a TED talk, easy. With regards, because I know that you're a brilliant storyteller and we can witness that. Is there anything with regards to training, or you said also, you start with the end and then you deconstruct, you rewind basically, and then you go backwards by knowing also by having the focus that you have your audience. Is there maybe any training you going through the journey of being like the storyteller that you are? Training or things that, I mean, you told us about your learnings, but things that you would also like give as a tip or piece of advice to people who would love to be great storytellers?
I think if you could get any training on how to be present, now whether that's acting or public speaking, I have, again, I've been really fortunate to work with some very, very talented people who've been very generous with their time. And I worked with an Australian actor, and, the nature of TV is it's hurry up and wait is the phrase we use in television. So there's a lot of sitting around doing nothing. And he was giving me lessons on how to talk with my body. How he said, what you have to understand is that particularly if you're on camera and there's a lot of you on camera, you can say so much without saying anything at all. So he was teaching me just that. I have been very fortunate over the years to work with Sir Tony Robinson a number of times, and Tony was really good at helping me understand how to use an audience, how to work a live audience, and how to use a stage properly. Because most people come out, they stand behind a podium, and they deliver something. Where Tony was, no, you've got all this real estate, use it, and it will help, and it helps for a whole bunch of reasons. And break that wall, go down into the audience if you need to go down into the audience. And so I think I was lucky because I kind of got that training on the job, if you like. But if somebody isn't fortunate enough to have that, I would strongly recommend getting some training in public speaking. And that's really about being comfortable with yourself, which can take a long time to get to that point. If you don't have training, it can take a lot of soul searching and a lot of therapy to get there. And if you can, get some acting experience, but only in that it will help you understand how to present yourself, how to project when you're talking. And really, good acting is about listening. And
Very nice.
good storytelling, even if you're just telling a story to an empty room, or is also about listening for the space that you need in that story. Where do you pause? How long do you pause for? How do you go back into the story? I think acting can really help with that.
Thanks a lot, Brad.
Yes, exactly. I already know that I have to make so many notes, but maybe just one more question because, you are a great storyteller, obviously, but who are some of the people that you have met? Or do you have any role models where you're like, oh, that person you should listen to? That is an amazing storyteller.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of, I do consume a few podcasts that I like. I like different types of storytelling and different ways into storytelling. I like Sarah Marshall, who does You're Wrong About. I love the way that, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think she's got a journalistic background, and I think that helps. There's a show called Behind the Bastards, which takes a really deep look at some of the evil people in history. But it does a really deep dive, and they have a great way it's a great example of somebody being incredibly authentic, but clearly passionate about what they do. And they deliver it. They tell their stories in a way that's engaging and enthralling, but
Nice.
it's not overly academic. And then, of course, you've got other people who are great. Dan Snow is another great person who tells really good stories. Tony Robinson is another great storyteller. Look, the large part of the stories I consume also are written. I like the written word. For good or bad, I'm a fan of Hemingway.
Yeah, the author.
He has
Nice.
a brevity about him, and he uses punctuation in a way that really resonates with me.
Love it. Love it. Brad, thanks a lot for this great chat. It feels like really humbling to listen to you, to learn from you, to exchange also like on what makes a great story and to get like all your piece of wisdom in a way because you have like such an extensive like experience and not only on TV as you said like on radio too. So thanks a lot. We learned so much about character, about making great connection, about the art of posing and holding space and silence, remaining authentic, also finding brilliance like in awkward moments. And also really humbling because every time you were praising like people who, just like made the person that you are today. So thanks a lot for sharing. And I was really pleased to have you as our next guest. I don't know, Donna, if you want to add anything.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting. We've learned a lot, and I think there's a lot of takeaways from this episode. So thank you very much, Brad, for being with us.
Thank you both. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you and about something I'm so passionate about. And best of luck with the series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Bye.
Bye.